I never thought I'd find myself here writing about something so personal, but maybe sharing my story will help me find some clarity, or at least some validation. My name is Karen, and I'm 44. I have an 18-year-old daughter, Lily, who's supposed to start college soon. My life has been turned upside down these past few months, and I don't know how to make sense of it all anymore. The chaos started when I discovered that my husband of 20 years, Mark, had been having an affair with his secretary, Emma, who's 34. He came clean about it a couple of months ago, and it hit me like a freight train. I filed for divorce the moment I could muster the strength, packed my things, and moved out of the house. Since then, I've been staying with my best friend, Stephanie, trying to piece my life back together. I assumed Lily would understand my pain and stand by me. After all, I was the one who had been wronged. But to my shock and heartbreak, she took Mark's side. She wasn't home the day Mark admitted the affair and I moved out, so I never got to say goodbye. I waited, thinking she'd text me, ask where I was, or check if I was okay. But days turned into a week and there was nothing. I finally texted her first, telling her about the divorce and the reason behind it. Her reply crushed me. I already knew, it doesn't really concern me. I couldn't believe it. How could it not concern her? I thought maybe Mark had gotten to her first, spinning his own version of events, and that's why she was so detached. I tried to talk to her multiple times afterward, hoping to clear the air and set the record straight. But to my dismay, she seemed to have already chosen her side. Mark didn't lie to her, she admitted as much, but she didn't care. She stayed firmly in his corner. Despite everything, I tried to maintain our relationship. I'd reach out to her, make time in my busy schedule filled with divorce proceedings and work, and try to arrange mother-daughter days. But Lily was cold and distant. Even when she agreed to meet, she'd spend most of the time on her phone, barely engaging with me. Over the last couple of weeks, she'd stopped responding to my texts altogether, icing me out completely. Then, about a week ago, I saw something that shattered what little hope I had left. She posted a picture on Instagram, hugging Emma, the woman my husband cheated with, captioning, "Mom." Seeing that felt like a dagger to my heart. It was bad enough to lose my husband to her, but now my daughter too? I completely snapped. I called Lily immediately, but she didn't pick up. In my frustration, I called her repeatedly, 17 times, until she finally answered, sounding annoyed. I didn't care. I demanded to know what the post meant and how she could call Emma Mom when I was the one who'd raised her. Her response was dismissive and cruel. "It's none of your business. Stop stalking my account." I reminded her that I was her mother, her biological mother, and that her behavior was beyond hurtful. But Lily didn't seem to care. She brushed me off, saying I should stop whining and focus on my own life. Then she hung up and blocked me. I couldn't believe it. My own daughter, the little girl I'd nurtured and loved, had turned her back on me. I cried for hours that night. It wasn't just about Mark anymore. It was about Lily too. The betrayal of my own flesh and blood felt unbearable. But after I let the tears out, a strange resolve came over me. If Lily didn't need me, then maybe I didn't need to keep sacrificing for her either. I'd saved diligently for her college fund over the years. Mark and I had agreed to split the cost of her education, each contributing to separate accounts. But after everything, I realized I didn't owe her that anymore. Not after the way she treated me. I decided to spend my half of the college fund on something I'd wanted for years. A beautiful house in a great neighborhood. I'd always dreamed of living there, but Mark and Lily had resisted moving because it would have meant leaving their comfort zone. With the college fund, I could finally make that dream a reality. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. I contacted the real estate agent, made the offer, and sealed the deal. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking back some control. The day I posted a picture of my new house on social media, I felt a surge of empowerment. I wasn't the woman sitting around, crying over things she couldn't change anymore. But unsurprisingly, the post made its way back to Mark. He called, furious, demanding to know how I could afford the house. I told him the truth. I'd used Lily's college fund. He exploded, calling me irresponsible and accusing me of punishing Lily for taking his side. But I stood my ground. I told him Lily made it clear that she didn't need me anymore. If she didn't need me, then she didn't need my money either. Mark couldn't argue with that and eventually hung up. I thought that was the end of it, but then Lily called. She was crying hysterically, asking how I could do this to her. She said she'd always put me first, and now I was betraying her. I reminded her of her own actions, blocking me, posting that picture, calling Emma Mom. She claimed it was just a gesture to make Emma feel comfortable in their new family dynamic. She said she hadn't meant to hurt me. But how could she not see the hurt she caused? I told her that she turned her back on me first and I was simply following her lead. For the first time in this entire ordeal, Lily seemed genuinely regretful. But it wasn't enough to erase the pain she'd already caused. When Lily hung up after that conversation, I didn't feel any relief. If anything, I felt worse. Her sobs echoed in my mind for hours afterward, bringing back memories of her as a child. I could picture her crying over scraped knees, lost toys, or the times I told her she couldn't have dessert before dinner. Back then, I was the one who always comforted her and always wiped away her tears. Now, I was the one making her cry, and I couldn't decide if I was justified or just being cruel. Still, I kept reminding myself of what had led me to this point. I wasn't punishing her. Not really. This wasn't about taking revenge. It was about doing something for myself for once. For years, I'd put everyone else's needs ahead of my own. I'd let Mark decide where we lived, how we spent our time, and even how we raised Lily. And then, when he betrayed me, I let myself believe that Lily would have my back. But she didn't. She chose him. And she didn't just choose him. She chose Emma. The thought of Emma made my stomach turn. She wasn't just Mark's affair partner. She was the wedge that drove my family apart. And Lily, my daughter, embraced her like a replacement for me. Every time I replayed that Instagram post in my mind, it felt like a slap in the face all over again. Mom. I couldn't erase the image, no matter how hard I tried. The following week was quiet, at least on the surface. Mark didn't call again, and Lily didn't try to reach out either. I focused on packing and finalizing the move to my new house. Stephanie helped me when she could, but most of it I did on my own. There was something therapeutic about sorting through my belongings, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. It felt like shedding old skin, stepping into a new chapter of my life. On moving day, I had to go back to the old house to collect a few things I'd left behind. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I knew it had to be done. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Mark's car and, to my surprise, Lily's as well. I hadn't expected to run into them, but there they were, Mark, Emma, and Lily, all standing in the living room together like a picture-perfect family. They ignored me as I walked through the house, which was honestly a relief. Mark busied himself with some papers, Emma hovered nearby with her fake polite smile, and Lily was scrolling on her phone, pretending I didn't exist. I didn't say a word to any of them. I focused on directing the movers and grabbing what was mine. Just as I was about to leave, Lily finally spoke up. She followed me out to my car, stopping me before I could get in. Mom, have you thought about what you're going to do for my college fund? She asked, her tone sharp and demanding. I stared at her, dumbfounded. After everything that had happened, the Instagram post, the blocking, the cold shoulder, she had the audacity to ask me about the money. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused, just that question, as if she expected me to hand over the money like nothing had happened. I didn't even bother to answer. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove away. The next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. The entitlement in her voice, the complete lack of regret, it infuriated me. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. This wasn't the Lily I knew. The Lily I raised was kind, thoughtful, and empathetic. What had happened to her? Was it something I did, something Mark did, or was it Emma's influence? I didn't have any answers, but I couldn't dwell on it forever. I had a new house to settle into and a new life to start. The neighborhood was everything I dreamed of, quiet, picturesque, and filled with friendly neighbors who welcomed me warmly. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. That peace didn't last long, though. Lily started texting me again. At first, I ignored her messages. I didn't have the energy to deal with her demands or her excuses. But she kept texting day after day, wearing me down. Finally, after almost a week, I caved and responded. I told her the truth. The money was gone, spent on the house. There was no getting it back. I also reminded her that she'd made her priorities clear. She chose Mark and Emma, and I didn't feel obligated to support her when she couldn't even show me a shred of respect. I suggested that maybe her new mom could help with her college expenses instead. Her reply came almost immediately. "It was just a post, Mom. You're overreacting, overreacting." That one sentence made my blood boil. To her, it was just a post. To me, it was a betrayal, a symbol of how far we drifted apart. I poured my heart out in a long text, explaining how much her actions had hurt me and how abandoned and disrespected I felt. I told her I couldn't understand how she could turn her back on me after everything we'd been through together. Her response, "You need to get over it." I was stunned. It felt like talking to a stranger, not my daughter. After that, I muted her notifications and archived the chat. I couldn't bring myself to block her entirely. She was still my daughter after all, but I needed space. If she wanted to keep testing my patience, I was getting closer and closer to my breaking point. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, she and Mark ambushed me at my office. It was a normal afternoon at work, and I was just wrapping up for the day. I planned to grab lunch at my favorite cafe nearby, hoping to enjoy some peace and quiet. But as I stepped outside the building, there they were, Mark and Lily, leaning against his car like some sort of team. I froze for a moment, the sight of them hitting me like a wave. I hadn't seen them together since moving out, and it was strange to see how united they seemed, especially after everything. I tried to walk past them, pretending I didn't see them, but they weren't about to let me off the hook that easily. They started following me, calling out my name. I could hear the irritation in Mark's voice and the desperation in Lily's. I clenched my fists, took a deep breath, and turned around to face them. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my tone as flat as possible. I didn't want to give them any more ammunition than they already had. "We need to talk," Mark said, his voice calm but firm, as if he had any right to demand anything from me. "About what?" I snapped. "I thought I made everything perfectly clear, You need to explain your actions," Lily chimed in, her arms crossed over her chest like she was the wronged party here. "Explain my actions?" I laughed bitterly. "And after everything you've done to me, you want me to explain myself to you?" Mark took a step closer, lowering his voice like he thought he could reason with me. "Karen, this is about Lily's future. You can't just throw her under the bus because you're upset with me. That was it. That was my breaking point. I looked at both of them, my voice shaking with anger. "Fine, let's talk. Follow me." I walked into the nearest restaurant, not waiting to see if they were behind me. Once we were seated at a table, I didn't waste any time. I started speaking before they could interrupt, laying everything out on the table. "I don't know what part of this you're not understanding," I began, looking directly at Lily. "Your father and I were together for almost 20 years. 20 years of building a life together, raising you, and trying to create a stable family. Then he decides to throw it all away for someone else, someone who is now so important to him that he's willing to erase me from your life." Mark opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop him. "No, let me finish. I expected betrayal from him. He made his choice. But you, Lily, you're my daughter, my only daughter. I carried you, raised you, and sacrificed so much for you. And what did you do in return? You sided with him, with her. You blocked me, ignored me, and then had the audacity to call Emma your mother. Do you have any idea how that feels? Do you even care?" Lily's face turned red, and her lips trembled like she was about to cry. But I wasn't finished. "I've spent months trying to understand you, trying to make excuses for you. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I wasn't there for you in the way you needed. But the truth is, you're an adult now. You know right from wrong. And you chose to hurt me. You chose to turn your back on me when I needed you the most. By now, my voice was shaking, and I could feel the eyes of nearby diners on us. But I didn't care. I had spent too long holding this in. I turned to Mark. "And you have no right to lecture me about Lily's future. You're the one who destroyed this family. You're the one who created this mess. So don't you dare act like you're the responsible parent now. The table fell silent. Lily's eyes were glistening with tears, and Mark looked like he didn't know what to say. I took a deep breath and softened my tone, looking at Lily one last time. You don't get to pick and choose when you want to treat me like your mother. You don't get to ignore me, insult me, and then come running back when you need something. That's not how this works. I stood up, grabbing my purse. I'm done explaining myself. If either of you still doesn't get it, then that's on you, Dot. As I turned to leave, I heard Lily's voice break. Mom, wait, Dot. But I didn't wait. I couldn't. I paid for my meal at the counter and walked out, leaving them sitting there in silence. My chest felt tight, and my hands were trembling, but I kept walking, not daring to look back. That night, I replayed the confrontation in my head over and over again. A part of me felt relieved, like I'd finally said everything I needed to say. But another part of me felt hollow. I hadn't wanted it to come to this. I didn't want to lose my daughter. But how could I keep her in my life when she treated me like I didn't matter? The next few days were quiet again. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. It was almost peaceful, but the peace felt empty. I started to wonder if this was it, if I'd never hear from Lily again. It had been a month since I last saw Lily. After the restaurant confrontation, I figured she'd written me off for good. Honestly, I'd come to terms with it, or at least I told myself I had. I'd flipped through old photo albums late at night, staring at pictures of the sweet little girl I used to know, wondering where she'd gone. The Lily I raised wouldn't have hurt me the way this Lily did. The silence between us was deafening. Every day I told myself it was better this way, less drama, less heartache. But the truth was, I missed her more than I could admit, even to myself. She was my daughter, and as much as I wanted to protect myself, there was a part of me that would always hold out hope for her to come back. Then, 3 days ago, I received an email from her. I sat staring at my inbox for what felt like forever before I opened it, my hands trembling. The subject line was simple, I'm sorry. I didn't know what to expect, but as I started reading, my chest tightened with every word. She apologized, truly apologized for everything. She admitted she'd been acting selfishly and explained why. Mark had promised her a car if she treated Emma well and played along with their happy family image. On top of that, he'd dangled the idea of an off-campus apartment in her second year of college as a reward. She said she thought that if she went along with it, she'd be able to get what she wanted without hurting anyone too much. But as time went on, she realized how wrong she was. I didn't know how to balance everything, Mom, she wrote. I thought I could keep you and Dad separate, but I was scared. I knew you'd ask me why I was being nice to Emma, and I didn't have the courage to tell you, so I pushed you away. I thought once I got what I wanted, I could fix things with you. But now I see I was wrong. None of it was worth losing you, Dot. By the time I finished reading, I had tears streaming down my face. For the first time, I felt like I understood her. Not just her actions, but the fear and confusion behind them. She wasn't just being cruel. She was a teenager caught in a storm of manipulation and bad choices. That didn't excuse what she'd done, but it gave me a glimmer of hope that the daughter I knew was still in there somewhere. At the end of the email, she asked if I would come to see her off when she left for college in a couple of weeks. She included the dates and times, leaving the decision entirely up to me. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive her, but that she wanted to try to make things right. I closed my laptop and sat there for hours, staring at nothing. My emotions were all over the place. On one hand, I was furious that she'd let something as trivial as a car or an apartment drive such a deep wedge between us. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore the courage it must have taken for her to admit her mistakes and reach out. The next day, I still hadn't responded. I kept rereading the email, dissecting every word, wondering if she really meant it, or if this was just another ploy to get what she wanted. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I could hear the sincerity in her words. She was trying, and as much as I wanted to protect myself from more heartbreak, I knew I had to try too. That night, I wrote her back. I told her the truth, that what she did hurt me more than anything else in my life, that her actions made me feel like I'd failed as a mother. But I also told her that I missed her and wanted to try to rebuild our relationship. I didn't sugarcoat anything, but I left the door open for us to move forward. We ended up talking on the phone later that evening. It started off awkward, lots of pauses and long silences, but as the conversation went on, the walls between us began to crumble. By the end of the call, we were both crying. She promised me she would never hurt me like that again, and that she was willing to do whatever it took to repair our relationship. We decided to give therapy a try. It was clear that there was too much pain and too many unresolved issues for us to handle on our own. I found a therapist who offered online sessions, and we booked our first appointment for the following week. It felt like a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. Lily also told me that she'd asked Mark and Emma to stay home when it was time for her to move to college. She wanted me to be the one to drop her off and help her settle in. "I want us to have that time together, Mom," she said, her voice cracking. "Just you and me." I was stunned. After everything, she chose me. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. The day Lily was set to leave for college felt like a fresh start, like maybe we were finally turning a corner. As I drove up to her father's house to pick her up, I could feel my nerves kicking in. I wasn't sure how it would feel to see her after everything that had happened. Would it be awkward, tense, or could we fall back into some semblance of the bond we once shared? When Lily stepped outside, she was carrying 2 overstuffed suitcases and a backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked so much older than the last time I'd seen her, like the little girl I raised was slipping away, leaving this grown woman in her place. I got out of the car to help her load up, and for a moment we just stood there looking at each other. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice soft and hesitant. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, giving her a small smile. We hugged, and though it felt a little stiff at first, it quickly turned into something real. I felt tears welling up, but I held them back. This wasn't the time to cry. This was a time to move forward. Mark and Emma didn't come outside, which was a relief. I wasn't in the mood for any confrontations, and I was grateful Lily had insisted they stay out of this moment. It felt like she was finally prioritizing me for the first time in months. The drive to her college was quiet at first. I wasn't sure what to say, and Lily seemed lost in thought, staring out the window. Eventually, though, she broke the silence. "I know I've said it already, but I really am sorry, Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I was thinking. I just felt stuck. I had to pick a side, and I thought if I didn't make Dad happy, I'd lose him too. Her words hit me hard. "Lily, you should never have felt like you had to choose between us," I said, keeping my eyes on the road but glancing at her in the mirror. "What your dad did was wrong, but it was between him and me. I never wanted you to feel like you had to take sides." "I know that now," she said, "but back then it just felt so complicated. And I thought, maybe if I kept my distance from you, I wouldn't have to deal with everything." I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I get that, Lily, I do. But pushing me away didn't make it any less painful. I needed you and you weren't there. That hurt more than anything, Dot." She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers nervously. "I know, I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I want to make it right. I want us to go back to how we used to be, Dot." Her words gave me hope, but I knew it wouldn't be that simple. "We'll get there," I said. "It's going to take time, but we'll get there, Dot." The rest of the drive was lighter. We talked about her classes, her roommate, and the club she wanted to join. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were connecting. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When we arrived at her campus, I helped her unpack and set up her dorm room. We laughed as we tried to figure out how to loft her bed and fit her mini fridge in the tiny space. It felt good, normal even, like we were rebuilding something that had been broken for far too long. Before I left, we stood outside her dorm, and she hugged me tightly. "Thank you for being here," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I know I don't deserve it, but thank you, Dot. You always deserve it," I said, holding her close. "You're my daughter, Lily." As I drove away, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a flicker of hope. Our relationship wasn't fully healed, and it might never be the same as it once was. But for the first time in months, I believed we could build something new, something stronger. In the weeks that followed, Lily and I kept in touch regularly. We started therapy together, and while it wasn't easy to revisit the pain and betrayal, it felt like we were finally addressing the wounds instead of letting them fester. Lily confessed that her father and Emma had manipulated her, and although I harbored some anger towards her, I observed her sincere efforts to make amends. Lily informed me that she had confronted Mark and Emma about everything, including their role in creating a rift between us. She said it didn't go over well, but she didn't care. "I don't need their approval anymore," she told me during one of our calls. "I just need to fix things with you. That simple statement meant more to me than I could put into words. For so long, I felt like I'd lost her, like the bond we shared had been shattered beyond repair. But now I could see the pieces coming back together. Slowly, yes, but surely. I won't lie and say everything is perfect now. There are still moments of tension, still memories that sting when I think about them. But we're working on it, one day at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I have my daughter back. Sometimes life doesn't go the way you expect. People let you down, and the pain feels unbearable. But if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that relationships can survive if both people are willing to fight for them. And right now, Lily and I are both fighting. That's all I can ask for. Story 2. When I couldn't satisfy their demands, my own wife and parents betrayed me. My life essentially changed 3 years ago. In my marriage to my now ex-wife Sarah, I was leading a very regular life. Although not flawless, everything was fine. I had job to do. We were simply two individuals coasting through life, with Sarah's work and the possibility of raising a kid at some time. Nothing extraordinary, simply the routine things of life. Then there was the vehicle collision. Everything appeared to be going wrong on one of those sporadic bad days. All I was doing was attempting to go home when all of a sudden, wow, I didn't even anticipate it when some fool ran a light. Then I found myself in a hospital bed, bruised and feeling like I had been hit by a freight train. To put it mildly, it was not the most enjoyable experience. To make sure I was okay and nothing major had gone wrong, they kept me in the hospital for a while. Even though I spent a lot of time trying to get my brain back in the proper place, I finally recovered physically. However, a few months after the accident, the real kicker happened. I began to notice something strange. I felt weird and had little energy. In summary, my physicians informed me that the impact had impacted my fertility, therefore eliminating any hope of me naturally becoming a parent. My entire existence changed once more. I was no longer merely getting over a few fractures. The fact that I might never be able to start a family was suddenly a reality for me. And to be honest, that struck far more forcefully than any fracture or bruising could. Sarah seemed astonished when I informed her. Yes, but she didn't exactly respond favorably. As if I had given her the weather report, she simply sat there and nodded. I didn't think she would lose it or anything, but it would have been wonderful if she had responded somehow. As soon as I informed her, she seemed to have mentally tuned out. After that, our relationship became quite quiet. She seemed aloof, but not nasty or anything. I initially assumed that she could be processing things. However, it became clear after a few weeks that she was avoiding the subject altogether. To find out if we were in agreement or if she had something she wanted to discuss, I made many attempts to bring it up with her. However, each time she dismissed it, she would remark something along the lines of, "We'll figure it out," or "Let's avoid worrying about it right now." That was the end of it. No genuine dialogue, no actual plans. She seemed to have no desire to deal with it at all. In the meanwhile, I was already having trouble coping with how much this was affecting my mental state. I'd always imagined myself as a father at some point. That may seem cheesy, but it was something I had anticipated and desired. And then suddenly, it was gone. Furthermore, the one person who was meant to be with me in this situation didn't even want to discuss it. I began to believe that I was alone in this situation. And my parents came next. Oh man, I'm still amazed by how they responded. My parents have long desired grandchildren. You know, they're the conventional kind. Imagine Christmas get-togethers, family portraits, and so forth. I thus anticipated at least some compassion, if not outright support, when I initially informed them about the accident and everything that followed. But all I received was silence. They would inquire about my well-being, but simply in a "did you heal yet" manner. Nothing regarding my mental health or how I was coping with the news of my infertility. My mom gave me one of those pitying glances that say, "Oh, that's too bad." And my dad simply kind of nodded, then nothing. They shifted the topic and began discussing the wedding of some distant relatives or something like. To be honest, it was very startling. They stopped phoning and didn't even check up on me throughout the course of the following few weeks, like they once did. My mom used to phone a few times a week to talk, but nowadays she just calls once every 2 weeks, and the calls feel rushed, as if she didn't want to talk to me on the phone. I was unable to ignore the stillness any longer since it was so evident. I felt alienated from my own family, as if I had been neglected because I was unable to provide them with the grandchildren they had always desired. I attempted to discuss it with them one day in the hopes that perhaps I was exaggerating. I explained to my mother how difficult this whole situation had been for me and how much help I needed. After being silent, she sighed and said something along the lines of, "Well, it's just a shame, isn't it?" That was the end of it. "No, our goal is to work together to overcome this. It's quite unfortunate." After that, I was at a loss for words. In the end, I pretended that her remark hadn't hurt as much as it had and simply nodded along. Things really began to sink in at that point. Sarah was separating herself from my parents, who I believed would always be there. Were behaving as though I were a malfunctioning device. They chose to ignore it as they had no idea how to remedy it. It seems to them that the moment they learned, my worth diminished. I was unable to fulfill their desires. I would leave for work, return home, and sit in this empty apartment trying to take it all in. However, I continued returning to the same query. Were these folks simply interested in my ability to bear children? I began to feel as though they didn't even care about me personally. They only regarded me as a means of obtaining grandchildren. They were done with me now that they had taken it off the table. Realizing that the people you believed would always be there for you are disposable is a cruel experience. It was also like living with a ghost when Sarah was around. She would go out or remain late at work without notifying me, or we would have meals together in complete quiet. I was attempting to seem like nothing was wrong while I was tiptoeing around my own wife. I knew in my heart, though, that she had already checked out. At night, I would lie in bed and gaze at the ceiling, wondering whether there was anything I could do to restore normalcy. However, I was unsure of where to begin. She would always shut me down or dismiss me as though my concerns were nothing more than annoyances whenever I attempted to discuss the future. It seemed like I was the only one remaining attempting to maintain order at that time. I was also worn out. Going through a situation with the people you care about by your side is one thing, but going through it alone, while everyone acts as though you're not even worth the effort, is quite another. It was very obvious that Sarah had mentally tuned out after weeks of attempting to move on. It was in the little things she had given up. No more sporadic texts during the day, no more kisses goodnight, nothing but quiet. It became as though I was a stranger in my own house. We weren't actually bickering or anything. She seemed to have just finished. She felt burdened by every suggestion of going on, and every attempt to discuss the future was shut down. I recall at one point sitting her down and saying, "We need to talk about this," pondering the possibility that we could resolve it. A miracle was not what I was requesting. All I wanted to know was whether we were still involved. However, she simply groaned, glanced at her phone and muttered, "I'm tired. Can't we do this right now?" And that was all. The emotion you get when you see someone has lost interest in attempting is difficult to describe. Like you're waiting for them to formally announce it and they're already halfway out the door. My parents, however, were nowhere to be seen. My mom used to check in at least once or twice a week, but nowadays she only does so maybe once a month. And even then, the chats feel forced, as if she is just checking in out of duty. I made several attempts to get in touch in the hopes that she would understand my situation and provide some help. Yet each call came to the same conclusion. She was dismissively stating something like, "Oh well, life goes on." No one appeared to care that I was losing the people who were important to me. I went to bed one night after having another quiet supper with Sarah and simply laid there, looking up at the ceiling, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Although I was aware that the accident had altered the situation, I didn't anticipate that I would be treated as a burden that everyone was eager to get rid of. Even worse was the fact that I began to believe it. I began to believe that perhaps I was the issue, that perhaps I wasn't worth staying for since I couldn't provide them with the future they had dreamed about. Sarah began working late or hanging out with friends more frequently around this time. At first it was subtle, but eventually it became commonplace. She would arrive home late, hardly speak to me, and then immediately go to bed. I kept getting the same response when I attempted to find out how her day was or whether she wanted to do something with me. I quote, "am worn out." I kept acting like it was normal, even though I understood what it meant. The fact that she had already checked out and was only waiting for the ideal opportunity to formally announce it was something I didn't want to confront. I made the decision to ask her directly one day if she was all right. She simply gave me this exhausted, expressionless face and said, "I don't know if this is what I want anymore," which gave me half hope that she would laugh it off and tell me I was overanalyzing things. No passion, no rage, just a flat, icy declaration. Despite feeling as like I had been hit in the stomach, I made an effort to remain composed. She simply shrugged and replied, "Perhaps we're just too different." I asked her what she meant in the hopes that she would say something that I could work with, something that we could repair. Distinct? We had spent years together. Together we had created our lives. Shared everything, endured hardships. All of a sudden we are two different people. She seemed to have already made up her decision, even if it didn't make sense. She simply shook her head and said something about it being about what she wanted, and not about me, when I tried to ask if there was anything I could do to make things right. By the conclusion, I felt more bewildered than ever after the most perplexing and annoying talk of my life. The weeks that followed were terrible. I was doing all in my power to improve the situation, assisting in the home, arranging brief dates, attempting to reignite our relationship. However, nothing appeared to change. She would act as though she had already checked out, but I could tell by the look in her eyes. It was similar to attempting to bring something that was already dead back to life. However, I was unable to stop. Perhaps stupidly, I continued expecting that I could repair it if I worked hard enough. Then, one evening, Sarah was sitting on the couch with a pile of papers in front of her when I arrived home from work. Seeing them made my stomach plummet. I was fully aware of their nature. She just handed me the divorce papers and stated, "I think this is what's best for both of us," without even attempting to cushion the blow. It seemed unreal, as if I were seeing the collapse of someone else's life rather than my own. She hardly made eye contact and simply shook her head when I inquired if there was any chance we could resolve the issue. Despite my internal disintegration, I made an effort to maintain my calm. I informed her that this was not what I wanted, that I was prepared to go to any lengths to put things right. She wasn't interested, though. She informed me that she had just reached her breaking point after considering it for some time. I had the impression that a vehicle had struck me. However, I gave a nod. Without even looking back, he signed the papers and watched her go. She seemed to have lost any sense of the significance of our life together. I sat by myself in that lonely apartment after she went, surrounded by recollections of a life that had vanished. I was left standing there attempting to piece together what had gone wrong, as if everything had been torn out from under me. My parents were missing, and I had lost my wife. I was unable to restore my entire network of support since it had fallen apart. I made an effort to get in touch with my parents in the days that followed in the hopes that they would finally understand my situation and support me. However, all calls ended up in voicemail. Not a single message was answered. They seemed to have forgotten about me, as if I were no longer real. I was unable to comprehend it. I grew up with these individuals, whom I believed would always be there for me. Now, they had entirely deserted me just when I needed them most. The quiet was overwhelming. I would return home to an empty apartment every day. No one with whom to speak, no one to rely on. I made an effort to divert my attention, but the loneliness was unbearable. It seemed like if I had been abandoned, as though everyone had concluded that I wasn't worth the trouble. When you're left alone, you get this sense that's difficult to describe, as if you're invisible, as if you're not important at all. I began to doubt everything. Pondering if they were correct. Perhaps I was the issue all along. However, I felt in my heart that I had done nothing to merit this. I tried my hardest to make things work, to support Sarah, to maintain my family's proximity. All I had left, though, was an empty flat and a ton of unanswered questions. I doubt I'd ever receive replies. I thought I would be alone for a time, maybe forever once Sarah left. For the first time, I had accepted that my family would not support me as I had always sought. Now that I hadn't given them the grandchildren they had so desperately desired, I assumed they would just let me fade into the background. They simply found new ways to get involved in my life and remind me of how much of a letdown they felt I was, rather than vanishing. A few months after the divorce was finalized, the first incidents occurred. My mom called to let me know that she and my dad wanted to stop over and see how I was doing. Although I wasn't overjoyed, I had the impression that perhaps they were genuinely attempting to make amends. This time, thus, I consented to their visit. They arrived with actual boxes containing my childhood belongings, as well as dusty awards, old trophies, and even some embarrassing middle school assignments that I hadn't seen in a long time. Without giving a reason, they threw them on the floor of my living room, then took a step back as if they had done me a great favor. I questioned why they were unloading my belongings on me out of the blue. "Well, we're planning to turn your old room into a nursery for when your sister decides to start a family," my mother remarked with a shrug. I was blown away. As far as I knew, my sister wasn't even seeing anyone, but immediately, parents were getting my room ready for the grandchildren they genuinely cared about. My dad had the audacity to remark, "Well, you're not exactly using the space anymore, are you?" When I told them it seemed like they were simply throwing me aside. That one really got to me. They made no effort to conceal it. Simply put, they were done with me. I hadn't given them what they desired. As a result, they were both physically and emotionally cleaning the house. I knew I couldn't keep giving them opportunities after they went. I hoped they would take the message and cease answering their calls for a time, since I knew I needed space. My mother, however, was not going to give me any rest. After she began making calls from various numbers, I began receiving messages from her friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, informing me that I had to support my family. They seemed to have orchestrated a whole guilt-tripping effort, since I wasn't leading the life they desired. A few months later, the next blow was delivered. One Saturday morning, my dad unexpectedly dropped by my house with my younger cousin Jake. Throughout his childhood, Jake has been a bit of a troublemaker. Never worked in a job. Left school, having to borrow money from someone all the time. He had apparently recently been fired from his most recent job and needed a place to stay. My dad thought that location should be my residence for some reason. As my dad threw Jake's suitcases in my entrance, behaving as though everything had already been agreed upon, I stood there utterly stunned. I questioned why in the world he felt it was okay to dump my cousin down at my house without even saying hello. And he dared to mention Jake's relatives. When things go hard, we all support one another. When I was at my lowest, I nearly burst out laughing at the irony. They interrupted me without even blinking. However, they now expected me to save my cousin's life. I bluntly informed my dad that Jake could find another place to crash and that he was not staying. My father rolled his eyes and said that I had changed and was now too self-centered. However, I resisted, and after a while he walked away, pulling a pouting Jake with him. Then there was a period of silence. I was mistaken to believe that they had finally understood the message. When I returned home a few weeks later, I discovered an envelope in my mailbox. My mother's handwritten letter, brimming with passive aggressiveness, was inside. She kept saying that I was destroying the family by being so aloof, and that she didn't recognize the person I had grown into. As if I hadn't heard it, she even included a sentence about how it's understandable that Sarah left. Already enough of her. She then dropped an explosive revelation in the last paragraph. They asked me to give my sister a share of my fortune. She stated that it was only right that I give my sister a portion of my share so that her children would have a head start in life, because I was unable to give them grandchildren. In essence, they wanted me to give my sister's imaginary children a portion of my future because I wasn't achieving their goal of producing grandchildren. I was enraged. This was more than simply going too far. This was trampling on the line after it had been burned. When my mother answered the phone, I gave it to her. I expressed to her how painful it was to watch them disregard me and expect me to make sacrifices for a family that had treated me as like I didn't exist. "We only want what's best for the family," she replied after a few seconds of silence. "You choose to be selfish, therefore you don't comprehend." For me, it was it. In that instant, I understood that nothing I ever accomplished would satisfy them. Even if I gave them all I had, they would still find a way to accuse me of failing them. I never answered the letter. I didn't return their call. I chose to block their numbers instead, and I began getting ready for the next wave of entitlement. They wouldn't let this go, I knew. My mother arrived at my door a week later, banging as if she were going to knock everything down. She didn't even say hello when I opened up. She entered without my invitation and seemed to be checking out my house. She then launched into a diatribe about family responsibilities and how I had a responsibility to help my sister and maintain the family's unity after everything I had done to them. She had the audacity to behave as though I was a bad person who had harmed them just by being here. I informed her that it was not my duty to provide for my sister's ideal life and that I was not providing her anything. "Well, if that's the way you want it, don't expect to be part of this family anymore," she added, giving me a nasty look. I knew that was precisely what I wanted as she bounded out. I had had enough of their demands, expectations, and continual reminders that I had fallen short of their ideal. I didn't want to be a member of a family that solely appreciated my contributions. Peace was what I want, and I was willing to walk away to find it for the first time. I regained control on that day. I was aware that there would be consequences, but I also understood that it was worth it. I was finally beginning to feel like my old self again after a year of trying to rebuild myself, only little scuffed on the edges. I wasn't skirting around people's expectations. I was just living my life. In all honesty, I had stopped looking back, made new acquaintances, and taken up a few new pastimes. I first got to know Emily about this time. Neither an app nor a prearranged strategy brought us together. It was entirely arbitrary. I had enrolled in the community center's photography course. It was something I'd wanted to do for a long time, but had never had the courage or time to undertake. Emily, who was enrolled in the same course, had been taking pictures for some time, mostly as a pastime. Her real interest in both the technical aspects and the small narratives that might be conveyed via photographs immediately caught my attention. She was one of those persons who could photograph a sidewalk and make it seem as though it had a personality of its own. At first, I didn't give it much thought. After a few sessions, we began talking sometimes, generally about the homework, but I assumed she was simply another student. In addition to being humorous and grounded, she had a natural ability to put everyone at ease. Not having to put on an act or pretend was pleasant. She was simply authentic. A number of us made the decision to go get coffee nearby one day after class. Before I knew it, Emily and I were seated next to one another and having a lengthy talk. We spoke about random topics rather than anything outrageous. Favorite films, strange travel encounters. When most people would merely watch a YouTube video, we wondered why we even bothered to sign up for a class. I recalled how effortless it was to converse with her as though we had known one another for a very long time. There was just a sincere chat with someone who genuinely listened, without any discomfort or forced small talk. As the weeks passed after class, we continued to hang around, sometimes alone, and other times in groups. However, it seemed to be just the two of us, even when there were other people around. I had no intention of dating or entering into a committed relationship. Even though I'd learnt not to rush things, Emily had a certain quality that I couldn't ignore. Perhaps this was the first time I had ever felt such a connection. It was not predicated on a common conception of what our lives ought to include. It was just two individuals having fun together. Emily and I began spending more time together outside of class after a few months. We would take walks, see neighborhood art exhibits, and eat from sporadic food trucks around the city. Not much. Just small things that have a big impact. She had a knack of making each moment seem like a journey. Even if we had no particular agenda and were just aimlessly exploring the city. I wasn't always watching over my shoulder or waiting for the other shoe to drop for the first time since my divorce. It was simple with Emily. I eventually confided in her about my history. I didn't look forward to it, but I thought she should know if this was going to be anything. I told her everything about Sarah, the tragedy, my family's response to my infertility, and everything else one evening after we had visited this hole-in-the-wall diner. I thought she would give me a pitying glance, perhaps a little uneasy, but she simply listened, occasionally nodding. She didn't look surprised or depressed when I finished. That's what she said. That sounds rather harsh. You're quite resilient for enduring all of that. To me, that meant the world, even though it was such a simple statement. It had never been phrased that way before. People either dismissed it as inconsequential or pretended that I was broken. Emily, though, simply got it. No pity, no drama, just being understanding. I think that's when I understood I wanted more from her than just friendship. I didn't say anything yet, though. I used caution, most likely more than I had to be. However, I didn't want to ruin this. Emily invited me to this event a few weeks later. Some of her friends' artwork was on exhibit at a small art show they were throwing. She had been assisting with the setup and felt I would like going with her. Meeting her pals was a little nerve-wracking, but they were just like her, creative, easygoing, and completely judgment-free. After we walked back to her apartment, I felt this unsaid change between us, and I ended up having a terrific time. It was a gentle realization that we both want something more, nothing grand or spectacular. I eventually plucked up the courage to officially ask her out the following time we got together. I will admit that I was really anxious. I was afraid of opening myself to someone again since I'd gone through so much. However, it seemed like a risk worth taking with Emily. I'd love to, she answered with a smile and a nod. It's as easy as that. My past connection with Emily was quite different from dating her now. I was not under any obligation to be someone I wasn't. She never gave me the impression that I had to live up to some unachievable standard or prove myself. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the burden of someone else's expectations, since she embraced me for who I was, warts and all. I might simply be myself, and it was sufficient. We began going on small road excursions, exploring the city, and discovering new interests virtually every weekend. She even helped me pick up photography again after it had been neglected for a spell. It had been years since I felt this lively. Our relationship had an easiness to it that I had never known before. Emily had a knack of elevating even the most mundane situations to the point where they seemed to matter. Then something happened that I didn't think was conceivable. The doctor gave me some surprising news. My therapies turned out to be more effective than I had anticipated. I couldn't simply possibly have children. It turned out that I could have a family. No further care is required. To be honest, it was a shock, but an amazing one. I half expected Emily to flip out when I told her, but she just smiled and remarked that perhaps it was meant to be. It was difficult to absorb, but Emily's composed, realistic response helped. This is not how she behaved. Anything about us was altered by big news. She simply embraced it as a fact of our tale. From that moment on, I was certain she was the one. Life felt different when the doctor told me that. I didn't have this burdensome burden on my shoulders for the first time in years. Emily and I decided to take things one step at a time after I told her everything. Sincerely, I was simply enjoying life with her, and we didn't need to jump right into anything, observing the natural course of events. On the other hand, we discovered we were expecting a daughter a few months later. It seemed unbelievable to me. After all the therapies and hardships I had endured, I was finally going to become a father. Emily was already shining as she chose names and clothing for the infant. Admittedly, I also became rather interested in it. As I would browse shops, I would find myself clutching small shoes and dreaming about our little girl one day. I never imagined that I'd have the opportunity to become a father. Thus, it all seemed like a miracle. We stayed quiet as we got ready for the arrival of our daughter. The majority of my previous relationships were no longer involved, and I was still avoiding contact with my family. I didn't see the need to start telling my parents about my life now, and I hadn't bothered to do so for years. Without them, my life had progressed, and to be honest, I was content with that. My tiny family and I were at last at peace when I had Emily. Our daughter was just a few months old when Emily and I took her for a stroll around the neighborhood one day. We were discussing miscellaneous topics, our plans and the future as she slept peacefully in the stroller. She did silly things as a baby. It was a day of tranquility and perfection. I noticed them at that point. My folks. They emerged from a house a few houses down the street they were strolling along. It was unexpected, but I suppose they were paying a visit to someone nearby. I went cold. I had no idea what to do. A part of me considered simply turning around and leaving. However, they saw me before I could even move. When my mom spotted us, her eyes glowed as if she had won the jackpot or something. After she gave my dad a shove, they all walked over grinning as if they had just met their long-lost son. It seemed unreal. They approached us while looking at the stroller, most likely making connections. The first thing my mother said was, "Is this your daughter?" She seems truly surprised, as if she was shocked that I had a family of my own without their assistance. They both looked at her as if they were witnessing a ghost, and I nodded while keeping the conversation brief. They obviously had a lot of questions, but I wasn't going to make their reunion any easier. At last, my dad said something along the lines of, "We're happy to see you're doing well. You have been missed." At that point, all of the memories began to resurface. They essentially wrote me off when I couldn't give them what they wanted, the years of quiet, and the way they treated me when I was at my lowest. They were now expecting me to embrace them when they returned, because they had finally made the decision to do so, as if we had only had a small argument. I made it apparent that I hadn't forgotten what they did, but I maintained a composed tone. "You left my life when I most needed you," I told them bluntly. "You left me behind. Everything has to be rebuilt by myself. And now that you see me with a family, you want to get back in. That isn't how it operates." My dad only nodded, and my mom seemed surprised, as if she was unsure of how to react, remained silent. They made an effort to show sympathy by expressing how difficult it was for them to learn that I couldn't have children. They began to portray themselves as the victims, as though I had somehow harmed them by refusing to return their grandchildren. Next, even though I could feel my fury building, I refused to be influenced by them. They couldn't guilt-trip me into forgiving them because I had been through too much. "I'm not going to pretend like nothing happened," I informed them. "You interrupted me while I was having trouble, caused me to feel unworthy since I was unable to fulfill your desires. And you believe you can just return now that I have a family?" My dad attempted to comfort me by telling me that they had always loved me and that they had simply made errors, but my mom looked like she was about to cry. But I had had enough of their justifications. Too many evenings were spent questioning whether I had done something wrong and why my own family had left me. And now that Emily and my baby were at my side, I understood that I no longer needed their approval. They were not going to be a part of my family, which I had always desired. My mom eventually asked if they might meet their grandchild after many awkward silences. As if she thought I would just hand her over, she grabbed for the stroller. My breaking point was that. I placed myself between them and my kid by moving in front of the stroller. "You no longer have the right to be in my life, and you most definitely won't be in hers," I informed them bluntly. "That's not what I owe you." They were truly surprised, as if they were incredulous that I had excluded them so totally. My mother began to beg, stating they would stop at nothing to put things right, but I didn't want to listen. They had shown their true selves to me after I had given them enough opportunity. I refused to take the chance of allowing them to re-enter my life in order to harm me, or worse, my daughter. I simply told them before they could respond. "Without you, I created this existence. You are not necessary to me. She doesn't either." I turned the stroller around and left without turning around. I felt an incredible feeling of relief as Emily gave me a sympathetic grin and gripped my hand. I wasn't allowing them to control me for the first time. That put a stop to it. I had confronted them, defended myself, and at last moved past the past. In addition to missing out on my life, my parents will now also lose out on my daughters. To be honest, I didn't feel guilty at all. I had made my decision, and they had made theirs. I had this amazing feeling of calm as we made our way home, as if a burden had been removed. I knew I had made the correct choice when I gazed down at my baby, who was dozing off in her stroller. It was the nicest present I could have given her, the assurance that she will be surrounded by really loving people as she grew up, people who, in difficult times, would never abandon her. I permanently shut the door on my past on that day. I was at last able to go on without any regrets since I had my family, my genuine family. Story 3. I am a 39-year-old man who has been married to my 36-year-old wife for 15 years. Our kid is 13 years old. My family is rather large. There are my 58-year-old mother, my 62-year-old father, my 30-year-old sister, and my 22-year-old youngest brother. Something unexpected occurred last year. In our bedroom, I discovered my wife sobbing. I questioned her about what was wrong. She informed me of her pregnancy. I told her it was fantastic news and was ecstatic. However, she appeared rather distressed and simply left the room, which I found somewhat odd. At about the same time, I saw that she was using her phone a lot more than normal because of the ongoing COVID crisis. Since no one else could come over to help, I was the only one caring for Mom and doing all the chores. She eventually gave birth to our daughter, who is really cute and resembles her mother exactly. Let's fast forward to the recent past. My younger brother began to visit frequently, almost every day. Since he is, after all, my younger brother, I first didn't give it much thought. However, I began to notice something strange when we all traveled to spend a few weeks with my parents. My wife was behaving more like my brother than was reasonable. I have a lot on my plate personally. I am the primary provider for my parents and our family. I work as an investment banker and manage a few stores for my parents. In addition, we rent out a number of our homes. Yes, I have a lot going on, but while I was at home, I couldn't help but observe how much time my brother and wife were spending together. She used to be closer to my sister than anybody else, so I found this strange. In addition to the strange emotions I was receiving from my brother and wife, I also noticed that my sister was spending more time with me than normal. She seemed to be attempting to convey something significant to me, but each time I questioned her about it, she would dismiss it and claim that everything was okay. She said there was nothing to be concerned about. Then, without warning, my dad wants to take me fishing alone, individually. Sure, why not? I ask. He begins telling us about his own fishing adventures and recollections of spending time with his own father at the same location while we are out fishing and relaxing. I mean, that was pleasant. In addition, Dad begins to show me how pleased he is of me and what a wonderful kid I am. However, it was evident to me that he had more to say. He eventually reaches the point where he expresses his sadness for my little brother. As it happens, my brother doesn't actually have many objectives. He smokes much, drinks too much, and isn't working. My mom always had a soft place for my brother, but my dad and he were never really close. As we're finishing up, suddenly my dad tells that he must go somewhere. He gives me this small piece of paper with instructions to read it when he leaves, along with the fishing equipment. When I open this document, my entire world suddenly changes. The results of the DNA test hit me like a ton of bricks. My daughter's biological father is not me. That was not enough for me to sit with. Everyone was already gathering at our family home when I hurried back. It was like entering a hurricane. When I confronted my brother and wife, they both acknowledged everything, expressed regret, and acknowledged that it was all a huge error. It became out that they had feelings for one another and that this had been going on for over a year. In an attempt to comfort me, my wife said she was sorry for what had happened and would always be sorry. She insisted that I was the ideal father and husband. But wow, it was a lot to hear. It simply didn't improve anything. Here's the dirt then. I'm this person who's constantly looking for a job, right? I'm always buzzing from work. I'm barely at home because of it. Don't get it wrong though. Not all of me was Mia. Twice a year I made sure we took those amazing vacations, and once or twice a month those adorable date nights. Additionally, we consistently maintained a bustling romance department. I was that guy all the time, dropping in and saying, "Hey, how are you?" I was hoping that if something was bothering her, she would open up. My sister suddenly enters the picture and says, "I knew something was off, but I just couldn't say it." Can you imagine the sensation of that? Similar to a gut punch. But hold on, it gets more bizarre. In an attempt to teach me acceptance, my mother chooses to join the whole scene, baby in tow. She is everything. My child has been bonded to this new baby, so let's just go on and celebrate. Which surprises the love kid of my brother and wife. By claiming that I'm the big bro, she is pleading for pardon. I also got to lead by example. My mouth fell to the ground. That's how my own family plays me. I simply let it out. Told my wife directly, I will not engage in these games. Vying for your focus. Divorce? Yes, that is now on the table. And my brother, whom I've always supported. As it happens, it was him who stabbed me. I left them to deal with the disaster they created and went away. Since I bounced, my phone has been exploding constantly. My dad calls me, attempting to be discreetly helpful because he is in the middle of my relationship with my mother. Carrying this guilt, he claims to have been a bad father and reveals that my mother was aware of the affair all along, but chose to remain silent. Forget it, I said. Perhaps I should just cut myself off from this so-called family, if this is how things are going to be. Once the divorce has been finalized, I haven't even had a chance to mention this spectacle to her family. In the meantime, my ex-boyfriend is always on my phone, making constant calls and sending a ton of texts. My son is really missing me in the midst of all of this. My entire universe seems to have been completely upended, and all I'm doing is attempting to determine which way is up. Here's the thing then. My brother, since everything went wrong, yes, he hasn't even made an effort to get in touch. He didn't say a word, but my sister did come forward and apologize. I know I should have been there for you, but I simply couldn't find the guts, she said. I've always thought of you as the superhero, and I'm really honored to have you as my brother. I was struck by it, you know? However, I must admit that I haven't had the energy to respond to her, or anybody else for that matter. Get this now. My mother suddenly makes the decision to call me. She starts talking about how everyone makes mistakes occasionally, and then goes on to say that if I just choose to forgive and move on, our family may miraculously become happy again. She then drops the shocking, claiming that my children require a father figure. And guess who's waiting in the wings if I can't be that guy? My sibling. Yes. As if that would improve the situation in any way. She also made an attempt to scare me by threatening to take away my chances of keeping my children if she supported me in court. That simply infuriated me. I pressed the block button on her more quickly than you can imagine. Betrayal. Since then, I have not spoken to any of them. Going into this entire divorce mess now is going to be very expensive. But now I'm saying bring it on. It's been difficult to sleep, and I've kept all of this a secret from almost everyone else. Don't think about it. Eating. What is that? I feel like I've lost everything that made life worthwhile, and I'm simply going through the motions. My spouse, my children, and my family, even my pride. Everything has simply disappeared into thin air. It has been a nightmare of a week. I'm unable to wake up, leaving me unsure of what I should do next. What's the purpose, really, without all that? Do you know? Edit. I thus spoke with a lawyer regarding the divorce process. The problem is that I need to begin the filing procedure immediately. According to the lawyer, I will need to pay spousal support, which is essentially money to support our kid and my soon-to-be ex-wife. Yes, I still adore her despite the fact that she is not biologically mine. The worst part is that, given the circumstances, it will be difficult to obtain primary custody for her, even if she is officially my daughter. Not by DNA, though. Indeed, the entire divorce process will not be easy or inexpensive. However, it appears that I will have to pay around $900 each month for them. Furthermore, it appears that I may wind up with shared custody of my kid after things are divided. That's around 50% time spent with him. In addition, I'll have to split half of our assets. Oh, and the DNA test I told you about, I apologize. I intended it to be a paternity test between my brother and daughter. According to the data, there is a 99% possibility that my brother is the father. Can you believe it, really? When my wife and I initially started dating, he was just 7 years old. Describe a chaotic scene. Here is a little report on my circumstances. As time passed, I was kind of clinging to the notion that perhaps, just possibly, things might begin to appear less bleak. But was I mistaken? It seems as though the world decided to intensify the drama for those who haven't been following my soap opera after observing my predicament. To get the whole story, you might want to go back and read my previous post. To cut a long tale short, I left our home after learning of the entire issue, organized my finances, spoke with some legal experts, and started the process of getting a divorce from this whole ordeal. On Friday of this past week, the divorce papers suddenly appeared in my possession. Then my wife unexpectedly arrives at my house. She tries to apologize for the entire disaster she created and pulls the "let's think about our son" card during our lengthy conversation. Here's the problem, though. I've made up my mind. I'm finished. I obtain this and give her the divorce papers. As though it would make me forget everything and end the divorce, she attempts to change the subject and woo me. Really, I told her to get out of there because I couldn't stand it. But hold on, there's more. Normally away having a great time in the Netherlands, my sister chose to return for what was meant to be a relaxing holiday. Well, this whole circus quickly threw that strategy out the window. She didn't mince words. We ended up having a heart-to-heart over the phone after she departed, where I laid into my parents and wife before she completed her vacation and went home. Being caught up in this whole mess caused her to feel somewhat conflicted. It seems that my mother had been pleading with her to keep the information from me. I was so worried about how I would react to the news. It turns out that my mom kept things quiet in part because of my younger brother. Though it didn't exactly make me feel better about the mess I'm in, the conversation with my sister did provide some clarity. Indeed, I have seen remarks circulating that suggest my life is too crazy to be real. To be honest, I hope that was all a horrible dream. Nope, it's all occurring, and I feel as like I'm witnessing the disintegration of my reality. It feels like everything I've ever cared about is slipping away from me. If there is a good side, it is this one. Recently, I was able to spend some time with my kid. We visited this gambling area. For a few hours. That is the only thing that is popular here. It resembled a brief reprieve from the mayhem. He and I are going on some virtual excursions alone. I therefore had a genuine conversation with my brother, correct? He breaks the news to me that our mom has been going through a really difficult time, crying almost every day. Then there's my wife and the entire thing. I suppose the ex-wife is just adrift in this sea of uncertainty, completely unclear of what to do next. She seems to be unable to find her way out of the difficult situation she finds herself in. But hold on, there's more. It turns out that my younger brother's lack of responsibility is largely to blame for the predicament we're in. The man would rather get wasted and drown in alcohol than deal with any actual obligations. So far, my sister and I have had enough. We both resolved to put the whole family turmoil behind us since we've had enough. We're even avoiding any controversy surrounding inheritance because really, who wants that sort of hassle? This is when things take a step further. I'm really considering severing all ties with the family. I'm considering simply moving to another nation and starting again. Through all of this, my sister, bless her, has been a pillar of support, even offering to help me set up if I decide to go to the Netherlands. And the more I consider it, the more I believe that's my direction. After a little while, I began the entire divorce procedure a year ago. It hasn't been easy, let me tell you. The days seem to go on forever, and I get really depressed every time I let my thoughts to return to the mess. I can't remember how many times I've been ill because I've been under so much stress, as well as my health. Yes, my blood pressure and blood sugar levels are all over the place and it's not going well. Then, without warning, my father calls me. There is some very unpleasant news for him. My mother suffered a severe stroke. She passed out in the middle of her meal, and now she lies in a hospital bed with a quite dire prognosis. In the middle of all commotion, the doctors advise us to keep her in our prayers, but they are not very optimistic. My ex-wife has been taking charge of the hospital's operations. My younger brother occasionally displays his face for a few hours before vanishing. Together, my dad, kids, and I are attempting to weather this storm. Dad is urging me to come visit, essentially anticipating the worst. My sister and I had a heart-to-heart about the whole thing, and she is equally conflicted as I am. A part of me is considering seeing my mother. However, a significant portion of me is just, I'm not sure, apprehensive. Man, it's a disaster. It's like attempting to solve a jigsaw with half the parts missing while you're trying to decide what to do next. This is the offer. The lady who is my mother is still my mother at the end of the day. However, it's a major deal, yet she made the decision to abandon me. She seemed to have considered every option for helping me. I just moved the opposite direction to stand with my wife after shrugging. The fact that my wife ended up with my brother isn't what really irritates me. Yes, it hurts like hell, but what hurts the most is the betrayal of my own physical and emotional integrity. Not a single person bothered to let me know what was going on, even though the entire team knew. By supporting my brother, and thus implying that I would be left alone if I made a big deal out of it, my mother truly stole the cake. A plot twist now. Suddenly my mom wants to visit me while she's in the hospital. I quote, "I'm a complete mess about it, to be quite honest. My mind is in such a bad place that I'm considering ending my life. I've tried opening up to therapists in the hopes of receiving some insightful advice, but it seems like they're only there to nod and accept my money without providing any genuine assistance. My family have been circling the hospital visits to spice up this drama. Additionally, news of my wife's brief adventure spreads. Seeing dominoes fall is analogous to this. I always thought my favorite uncle was level-headed, but now he loses it all. Not only that, but he attacks her and my brother verbally while they are in the hospital. My adolescent had to take over and play the peacekeeper since it was that horrible. And it worked. Unbelievably. Thus, I find myself enmeshed in this whole chaos. I've been discussing my ideas with my friends in an attempt to get perspective. All of them are essentially singing the same song: complete the divorce, move, and even start again in another nation. Make a fresh start. Try to put together what appears to be happiness with a new person. I quote, "I'm simply trying to live day by day, but there's a lot to consider. This is where I am now. Making any type of planning is like attempting to capture smoke with my bare hands, and I feel like I'm floating in this strange vacuum. It simply isn't taking place. I had this meeting with my lawyer to attempt to figure out what I may do next." He explains to me that, in theory, I might still receive my share of the estate even if my mother never got around to drafting a will. That is, assuming I don't give up on it or if she doesn't decide to remove me from the situation completely. Nothing like that has occurred as of yet. Here, quote, "S the worst part, though. At this moment, my family is still holding on to the money from the inheritance. I just no longer find any significance in it. Making sure my son is okay is all that is on my mind and all that I truly care about. I want so badly to simply grab him and get away from this family disaster. Look for a place where we can relax and feel secure. I'm now attempting to ensure my son has a bright future by becoming involved in the paternity dispute. It looks like it will be much more of a hardship than the divorce. And that's saying something, I tell you. It seems that in many jurisdictions, the entire affair scenario doesn't truly tilt the scales. And I'm in a bit of a bind because my wife has been the one at home with our child. However, I've discovered a small strategy. It may really work in my advantage if I give up any inheritance claims. I might even avoid the whole spousal support issue. However, that's a big if and depends on us being able to work together. In addition, I have the choice to complain about my brother for destroying my marriage. In addition, my children are still underage. It could be effective to impose a restraining order on my brother and wife, particularly considering I'm from a place where the entire drug and booze thing doesn't sit well. Indeed, a ray of optimism is seen through this storm cloud. But gosh, I've been completely caught off guard by my mom's health taking a serious turn for the worse. It's amazing how a few weeks can completely upend your existence and take you to the brink of despair. My son is the one thing that has kept me rooted during this entire catastrophe. He helps me navigate even the darkest nights like a beacon of light. The one thing that makes me realize that I must continue to push through this mess. Throwing yourself into the deep end then. My mother's illness was far worse than everyone had anticipated. Even with all the animosity, I couldn't ignore her. It was one of those times when you could just turn up and forget about the past. So I did. I saw her like that, all frail and wired up to machines, when I went to the hospital. I was affected by it. It served as a gut punch reminder that despite everything, there is still a familial bond that is difficult to cut off. I felt compelled to handle this difficult problem. I talked with Taylor. I made an effort to explain the entire dress code. Our topic is black tuxedos, very James Bond. And perhaps, just possibly, I became a little too intense. I'm not proud of what I said in the end. For example, asking him to be more manly and implying that his typical mannerisms would make people laugh. Being the champion that he is, Taylor first just shrugged it off and joked about wearing a white dress. However, following our conversation, he made the decision to decline the wedding. I can't help but feel like I made a mistake, even though he has been calm about it and assured me there are no hard feelings. Despite his tendency to follow his own path, Taylor has been my ride or die for years, and I cherish our relationship much. Our group chat is currently exploding with questions from my family over Taylor's decision to skip the wedding, and our group of friends has been tense ever since he declined the invitation. I'm now wondering if I was too severe or if I was too preoccupied with organizing the wedding to keep in mind what matters most. Did I make a huge mistake? Am I the villain in this situation? It gets considerably messier from here. My wife, or maybe more accurately, my soon-to-be ex-wife, was playing the obedient daughter-in-law in the hospital. Watching her move across the room as if nothing had occurred was unreal. Our interactions like traversing a minefield. In the middle of this, we were both carefully avoiding the enormous elephant in the room. With the exception of his fleeting appearances in the hospital, my brother, who has been MIA, ultimately chooses to have a heart-to-heart. To put it mildly, it was embarrassing. He's opening up, claiming he's adrift without his older brother's supervision, and expressing regret for the mayhem he caused. There was a part of me that wanted to ignore him. However, another part of him, possibly the one that recalled all the happy days before everything went wrong, could not just close the door. My sister has been my pillar of support during all of this. She has been taking care of our parents, managing the logistics, and keeping me from going crazy. In order to help mend things, or at least get us to a point where we can be in the same room without it turning into World War III, she has even begun to discuss scheduling some family therapy sessions. The legal struggle has been a whole other animal. As if we were planning a military takeover, my lawyer has been on rapid dial. We're juggling everything. Divorce, custody, inheritance, you name it. The bright side. We may have discovered a weakness that may help me win the custody dispute. Considering my brother and wife's entire issue, even if it's unlikely, I'll take what I can get for now. The worst part is about to come. Things became more convoluted just when I believed they couldn't get any more complicated. Bless his heart, my kid has been handling all of this rather well. However, it's obvious that it's affecting him. His grades have plummeted, and he has been misbehaving and fighting at school. In addition to everything else, I'm attempting to be super dad by guiding him through this difficult time without losing who he is. Then there's my wife and the entire thing. Or to be more specific, she has been giving out conflicting messages, acting as though we are sworn enemies one moment, then begging for another opportunity the next. I wish I could get off this roller coaster, but I've been making an effort to be at least somewhat cordial for the benefit of our children. What is the strategy going forward then? To be honest, you have to take things one day at a time. Providing my youngster with a stable atmosphere and letting him know he's not alone are my top priorities. Even though the divorce is still on schedule, I'm prepared for the effect, even though it will be a difficult journey. When it comes to family dynamics, it's like attempting to negotiate a minefield while wearing a blindfold. A great deal of betrayal and hurt are present. However, there is also a ray of optimism that we might be able to salvage something from this debris. Not only will it not be quick, but it will also not be simple. However, I'm beginning to believe that there could be a glimmer of hope at the end of this really bleak tunnel. I quote, "We've been making an effort to concentrate on the good things, the epiphanies, the minor triumphs, and the lessons this entire experience has taught me in the interim. In addition to serving as a reminder of what matters most in life, it has, rather surprisingly, strengthened my bonds with other family members. Let's simply say that it has helped me identify my true dependability." That quote, it. The most recent chapter in my life's continuous story. There have been several detours along the way, UPS and downs, but I'm developing, learning, and, most importantly, surviving through it all. Hopefully the following chapter will be a bit less dramatic. Who am I kidding, though? If all goes well, I should have enough material for a best-selling book by the end of this.